Power feels different in times of war because uncertainty stops being abstract. The future becomes harder to picture, information becomes harder to trust, and people start scanning for something solid to hold on to. In that atmosphere, power doesn't only mean weapons or authority. It means the ability to shape what feels real, what feels safe, and what people believe they must do next. And when fear is widespread, the mind becomes more vulnerable to any system that promises clarity. Research shows that under threat, human attention narrows. People look for patterns, certainty, and quick explanations because ambiguity becomes psychologically expensive. In daily life, you can tolerate not knowing. In wartime, not knowing can feel like danger. Psychological studies indicate that when uncertainty rises, people often shift towards stronger preference for order, leadership, and group belonging because those things reduce internal chaos. Power, in this context, becomes a type of emotional regulation at scale. One way power grows in wartime is through narrative control. When the nervous system is activated, stories matter more than details. People want a coherent frame. Who is good? Who is bad? What this means, and what will happen if we don't act. Studies suggest that simple, emotionally clear narratives spread faster under stress because they reduce cognitive load. Complexity asks you to hold competing truths, and in high-threat environments, that can feel unbearable. So power often moves toward whoever can create the most convincing sense of certainty, even if certainty is partly constructed. Another layer is identity. War pressures people into sharper categories: us and them, loyal and disloyal, safe and unsafe. Researchers have found that when group threat is high, in-group bonding intensifies and out-group suspicion increases. This is not always because people become cruel. It's because belonging becomes a nervous system need. Being aligned with a group can feel like protection. Power can then operate through social inclusion. Who gets to belong? Who gets doubted? Who gets labeled? The fear of exclusion becomes its own force, pushing people to conform even when they're privately conflicted. Power also shifts through the psychology of obedience and responsibility. Psychological studies indicate that in high-stakes environments, people can become more willing to defer to authority because decision-making feels risky. When consequences feel enormous, personal choice can feel like a burden. Handing over judgment can feel like relief. This doesn't mean people lose agency entirely. It means the nervous system may prefer the stability of external direction over the stress of internal uncertainty. In wartime, power often expands through that preference. At the same time, power is not only held by leaders, it also shows up in everyday behaviors: what people repeat, what they avoid saying, what they share, what they assume. Research shows that social pressure can be as regulating as direct force. When a community is under stress, people monitor each other more. Tone becomes politicized. Silence becomes interpreted. A person can feel watched even without anyone explicitly watching them. That creates self-censorship, not always as fear of punishment, but as fear of social rupture. When relationships feel like survival resources, staying aligned can feel necessary. Information becomes a battlefield too, psychologically. Studies suggest that under chronic stress, people seek more information, but also become more vulnerable to misinformation that confirms their emotional needs. When someone feels powerless, they may cling to explanations that restore a sense of control. When someone feels threatened, they may cling to information that justifies aggression as protection. Researchers have found that people often treat emotionally satisfying information as true more quickly than emotionally uncomfortable information, especially when their identity is involved. Power can then operate through attention itself: what gets amplified, what gets dismissed, and what becomes obvious without being examined. There's also the role of moral emotion. Wartime can intensify emotions like anger, contempt, pride, and shame. Psychological studies indicate that anger can reduce fear by creating a sense of energy and direction. In that sense, anger is often a stabilizer. It makes the world feel simpler. There is a target, there is a reason, there is a path. Power can grow by activating moral anger because it unifies groups and reduces doubt. But it can also shrink empathy because empathy requires psychological space. Under threat, that space becomes rare. Power in wartime also shapes the body. Chronic threat changes sleep, attention, and emotional regulation. Research shows that sustained stress can keep the nervous system in a heightened state, which makes people more reactive and less tolerant of ambiguity. In that state, compromise can feel like danger, nuance can feel like betrayal, and uncertainty can feel like weakness. These aren't just political shifts, they're physiological shifts. When the body is braced, the mind tends to interpret the world through a protective lens. This is where internal consequences become quietly profound. When people live inside high-threat narratives for long periods, self-image can change. You may become more suspicious, more guarded, more emotionally flat, or more intense. Relationships can become strained because everyone is carrying a different version of fear. Studies suggest that under collective stress, people often oscillate between hyper-engagement and shutdown, obsessively tracking updates, then feeling numb, then returning to tracking. That pattern isn't lack of care. It's the nervous system trying to manage overload. There is also a paradox in wartime power. The more powerless people feel, the more they may crave certainty, and the more certainty can be offered by rigid systems. Researchers have found that when people feel loss of control, they can become more attracted to clear rules and strong boundaries, even at the cost of complexity. Power can then expand by offering a sense of inevitability. This is the only way. The mind often accepts inevitability when it feels safer than uncertainty. A calmer way to understand power in times of war is to see it as a psychological response to collective threat. Power grows where fear concentrates, where identity hardens, where narratives simplify, and where the nervous system seeks stability. That doesn't excuse harm, and it doesn't romanticize strength. It simply explains why people can change so quickly when the environment changes. In wartime, power is not only about control over territory, it's control over meaning, belonging, and the feeling of safety inside the mind. If this felt relevant, you can like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who thinks about how fear reshapes society. And if you want, drop a comment about what you notice most in times of conflict: certainty, division, silence, or the way people search for something solid to trust.